Welcome to Through My Eyes, our series of interviews with Mohawk Valley veterans. Sponsored by Dave Warner and the Studio 25 Podcast Network. I'm Ralph Renzulli, and I'm really happy to have with me today Joe Mastrocco. Joe is from St. Johnsville. He served in World War II in the Navy, and he just celebrated his 100th birthday this past August. Joe, thanks for doing this. I appreciate it. Thank you for your service, and happy belated birthday.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
How you feeling at 100 years old? Are you doing okay?
I feel sometimes very good, you know. I like it when I get out. I feel I'm awake most of the time. I can't get out the door, and you get groggy, you know.
Yeah, it's got to be tougher in the winter, isn't it?
I finally got wheels. Guess what? I haven't been able to, it was all nice weather and everything. Finally, the VA got me wheels, got it home. My neighbor, Tony, got me all ready, and it's just a brand new thing, and I can't go because the weather's bad.
Well, it'll change eventually.
I hope so.
So I thought I'd start out with a brief history of your early life. Like, just tell me, where were you born? Where did you grow up?
I was born in Canajoharie, New York, on Mohawk Street. I was, and my parents lived there. I think I was about 4 years old. My dad bought a home in St. Johnsville, New York, down by the ballpark where the playground is. There's a little thing they used to call it, when I grew up, they used to call it the Pigtail Alley. You know, we were, believe it or not, it was mostly people from Eastern Europe lived there, you know, very few from there. And most of them, matter of fact, in that part of that Pigtail Alley was 27 homes. It was.
Okay.
You know how many people lived in those 27? 165 people lived in those.
Wow.
And I said, I know one family had 8. Believe it or not, across the street, I think they had 8. It was 16 in just the 2 homes there they were when I grew up. I said, mostly Italians, Ukrainians, we had Russians, French, and then the Dutch we did too. And we had seen about everything.
Typical melting pot.
Yeah, it was. We were. And that's probably why they thought we were the lowest, you know, in this thing.
Yeah. So you were born in Canajoharie. Were you born at home or in a hospital?
No, I was born in my uncle's house.
Okay.
Yeah. My mother and father lived about on Mohawk Street. I think they lived about 8 or 9 homes to the north of him, you know. He did. And when so he brought her down. At the time, I guess he brought her at his house, you know. And because I seen the house, since then they tore it down. But it was a small home. It wasn't a real big place, you know. Okay. And they brought me there. And I was born there on Mohawk Street there. It used to be, next door was Terranova's Bar. We used to be right next door to it, too.
Everybody remembers the bars. So you were born in 1924.
Yes.
What's your earliest memory?
I think when I was in St. John's, but, you know, I remember where the Mohawk used to have the railroad used to be there. I don't know if you remember.
No, I don't.
Well, before Beachstone used to order their fruits and vegetables, and all of them came up by freight. And it was, I think there was like 6 or 8 tracks from Mohawk Street towards the old building. There's one of the Beachstone buildings still left. That's the only one left there at the rail. And they would bring them up with the railroad cars, they would, and then they shift them back and forth, you know. But I do remember, like, my cousin Boomer, he was 5 years older than me. No, 5 months older than me. Mm-hmm. And when I go down, I remember going down playing with him down there. And we used to ride Mohawk Street right about maybe 2 foot from the tracks it did. Well, we go up and sit on a railroad track while they're shooting those boxcars at the end. Come down to loosen them up. You see the engineer yank, and we sit there watch. We sit the part watch it go down. I don't know why we did, but that was to us, being 4 or maybe 5 years old, it was something to watch. And my Aunt Mary look out the window. She come charging out. What are you kids doing on the railroad? They might run you over. They could set the boxcar down. We'd be probably sit there while the train ran over the top of us. And when we think, but Boomer and I used to say, we're lucky. We're still here yet. He used to say. Yeah. He died about 3 years ago. He did. Okay. I missed him. We used to go down and visit him every time. I missed him. He fell down. He did. Yeah. I put him in nursing home. And like, when you fall, you're there until you. Yeah. I say they're there until they play you.
That's right. So, did you attend school in St. Johnsville?
Yes.
Do you remember grade school at all?
I remember. I should be tell. I remember when I went to first grade. Very little. I could speak very little English. I never realized it till years later. Just about every oldest time. I don't know about the other. Probably maybe they had the problem with other, foreign speaking people. But all the Italian number one son or daughter always was left behind. And when I got there, I could speak very little English. In those days, they didn't give you any special teacher or anything, and they just flunked you, And I remember I was angry. I cried, because I wanted to be with kids. And believe it or not, half of the class were Italians. I grew up.
So your mother and father spoke Italian in the home?
Yeah, home. That's all we spoke is Italian when we were home because they could speak very little. They learned to speak well. My father spoke very good, but he never would want to learn to read and write. He could Italian. I always remember every Thursday when I got old enough, I used to run up to the Nellis newsroom and get every Thursday the Italian paper, La Strada, would come in. And I'd go up, give him 10 cents, bring it down. My mother would give me the dime, but my father would. And when I brought it in, I'd go and give it to my mother. My father grabbed it, sits down. I could still see him. He sit there, read that page for page, and my mother standing there fuming. I bought the thing. I paid for it, and you're reading my paper, but you never say anything. She just go ahead and do her own work and everything.
So obviously, your mom and dad were immigrants.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. When did they come to this country? Do you recall?
My father came in 1911, I think. He was 17 years old when he came, and my mother was 18 when she came. They all both at Ellis Island, and my father came on there, and he told how he said with him he already had his name put on because he had older brothers here. I had my uncle Joe Mastrocco lived in St. Johnsville, and he was one of the older ones. And then we had Dominic Mastrocco. He lived in Bedford Hill. Matter of fact, the prison, where the women's prison is, Bedford Hill prison down there. You could sit on his porch, you could see down there. I remember when we used to go down, just about, I'd say maybe I was 6 or 7. Every Christmas, I'd get a train and go down there for Christmas. And lots of time the weather's nicer down there in the city area. And I remember sitting on the front porch and I always see these Italian, was in the Italian section, all these Italian men be around the fence and just sit there. I wonder what they do. Finally, when I come home from the service and we got talking, my cousin Paul one day says, all those Italians would sit there. I said, it was a woman in prison. What do you do? He said, do you know what they do, Joe? He said, they tease them. I said, what do you mean they tease them? They bring a gallon of wine. They sit there and drink the wine. They say, give me a swim. Can't you behind there? I might go to jail, All any excuse. But then they would sneak something in them to have them drink, I guess.
Probably homemade Italian
wine.
Oh, right?
Definitely.
I had some of that when I was a kid. My grandmother always had a jug by the kitchen table.
My father used to make some wine. I never thought how he made it. I knew how he made it, but I didn't know why. And I remember one, Larry Reidenberg, trying to think some of the guys. They weren't Italians, but they loved this wine. Yeah. And they always used to say to him, when your father used to make that Dago Red, I said, yeah. I said, why did? I said, that was really from regular grapes. They were from wild. Believe it or not, my father used to go. I remember we'd go down across the railroad tracks over the bridge, go down the old canal, and get big wild grapes, big clusters of grapes. They used to grow big. put them in a basket, and I had to reel back with my little red cart pull, and he'd be carrying 2 big bags of the wine. And he'd bring them, then he got the wine press, and he'd press it out, the wine, and then he'd go up to Brown's, used to have the cider mill there up on the west end of the village there, by the creek there, right there with the cemetery, west end of the cemetery there. And he'd go up and get, I don't know how many gallons of cider he could buy from him, and bring them down, and he mix it up and ferment the wine and that. And when they got that going, you believe it or not, they came from any place from St. John's. It didn't matter what they were. My mother used to get very angry sometimes. She says, the only trouble they come here, he said, when they want the wine, he said, when the wine's gone, you don't see any of them. They're gone. He says. Yeah. But,
so, as I said, you were born in 1924. The Depression hit in 1929.
Yeah.
And you would have been only 5 at that time. But even after that, the Depression lasted a long time. Did it impact you and your family, your mom and dad?
Yes, it did.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Because my dad always worked, well, today you call it construction work he did. If you had a sidewalk to put in, or a wall to put in cement or anything, they'd always call it. My dad at that time would do the sidewalks all summer or the walls all summer, And they said, why? I said, today you call it construction work. You know what that was? Heavy labor. He said, those guys would not sit there, mix cement in a barrel or in a little trough. I said, you ever mix cement in a trough? I said, when I was 10, 11, I used to help them pull that. I used to say, Bob, my arm's getting tired. He says, I say, no, they are. He said, yeah, but my muscle. He says, you haven't got any muscles. How can you hurt? He said to me.
That was bull work. Yeah. That was real bull work back then.
Then the worst part about it, he had to go up, smooth it out. If he did it in the morning, in the afternoon, he'd go up, put a cloth on and smooth it out. And before dark come, I don't know how he put water to shine it, the thing. It had to be just right. And when he got done, he'd cover it for the night. Then the next day, he'd come up and take the burlap bag off. Yeah. And then if he had to smooth it again a little bit, he would. And when he got done, it was just perfect. It was all the time.
But he found work. He worked.
It was hard in the summer, but in the winter months, he couldn't get work. He used to dig ditches. I remember, I think I was in the 3rd or 4th grade. St. John's School. I don't know if you've ever been to the high school there. They got the steps off Monroe Street. Walk up there. There's a big brick building there. I don't remember the family, but Ben Walworth used to live there. And their sewage line got plugged down in Monroe Street there. And there was a hill. Believe it or not, he took the job to dig that all out of the hill, dig it by hand. And the village chopped up the road. I don't know how they did it. And he dug it all by hand. I remember every time I walk up to school, school used to be where Stewart's ice cream by the bank, right there where the senior citizen used to be the grammar school there. And I used to go up, Mom would always make a pail. I wish I'd have kept it. I understand it's a collectible with the water bottle, the coffee barrel in the middle, right in the middle, and put the lunch. And I go up, drop it off to him there, and he'd get up and he'd sit on the side of the road or the steps or wherever it was and eat his lunch. And then when he got through, he'd work in the daylight to sunset. He got only $1. $1 for a day's work. The next day he had to go back another. So if it lasted all week, that's all he made was $5 for the whole week. And he'd be working probably 10 hours. He'd put 50 hours in for $5. He would.
Oh my God! Yeah. Wow, what a difference from today, huh?
Yeah.
So, tell me a little bit about high school. You have any fond memories of? I assume you attended high school right in St. Johnsville.
I did. Yeah, but believe it or not, when I got up there, Roosevelt came out with some. I don't remember, help students in there, and I got my freshman year, and John Alof, who was the coach, the athletic director at St. John's, his son coached the Herkimer Community College here. Young Jack Alof, and he come to me. He says, we need someone to clean the hallway up, sweep the hallway up, and the gym up every day. And he said, we wanted, and I think they gave me $1. They did. And boy, that helped. I told Mom I took it, and I would sweep down. I go start on the 3rd floor, and then work downstairs floor, and the bottom floor. Then I go in the gym and sweep that up, take it down. And the first time, Coach Ilion looked around. He says, "Okay, very good," he said to me. I was so proud that I kept looking. My father always used to say to me, if you're not going to do the job right, don't do it at all. Mm-hmm. He said, now, what was it up? Don't do it because you want to show off that you could do better than that guy. You do what you can do. Never mind what the other fellow up the road does better than you. He said, you do what you can do. He used to say, the best you can do. And I always kept that on. Even when I worked for the beach stop, the guys used to make fun of me there. How come you make beaches so shy? I'm looking at that's the way I grew up. Not that I try to I'll show them or anything, but try to do the best I could all the time. Yeah. But it was hard sometimes to keep up with the timings and everything. And when I was in school, I wasn't a quick learner. Very slow. I had to go over and over, study. I don't know what, because I grew up as Italian, or there wasn't English. I noticed the kids that grew up, most of them that had English and their parents could speak good English, they always had better marks and everything, and all that stuff. But I don't know if that was a hindrance or not. I don't remember.
Well, you speak very well now, so I don't even detect any sort of Italian accent or anything. So you did well.
Yeah,
you did well. So I keep going back to 1924 because I'm doing the math in my head. So in 1941, you were 17 years old.
Yeah.
How did you hear about Pearl Harbor?
Believe it or not, I was the doorman at Smalley's Theater at that time. And I'm sitting there collecting tickets, I did. And the only reason I got there, Mr. Rope Peter, was the doorman. And I used to deliver the pamphlets for the theaters, the Smalley's, door to door. And that's all I got was 2 free passes for a matinee Saturday Sunday. But to me, it was something to go to the movies twice there. And Mr. Rope Peter, and there was the lady's name. I don't remember what her maiden name was. Jean Livingston, her mother, I think. Jean Livingston. And everybody was afraid of that lady. But it was something about her, she kind of liked me. And she kind of took me in her wings, guided me in there. And with her, believe it or not, with her help and everything, she got it. And I want to say something about her. And when the war broke out, she did all the book work for the whoever was the manager. She did the book work and everything, and whatever. She never got any extra money for it. The manager was. When the war broke out, they were having a tough time getting managers. So she applied. This is what I heard. I felt bad for her because she quit right afterwards. She just walked away. And she tried to get manage the St. John's the Theater. Mr. Smalley wouldn't give it to her. He said it's a man's job. Almost Mr. Smalley missed a big thing because that lady could have been a great manager. I mean, she was really good. And, her daughter graduated a year ahead of me. And she's very successful. She was, because she worked for Montgomery Ward. She managed a manager in the Montgomery Ward store, she was. And a couple other things she did.
So because she was a female, she didn't get the job.
In those days, you couldn't.
Yeah.
And there was something about it. Yeah. And another fault in those days was if you were married, if you were single, they'd hire you. And so say the man or the woman both working, no more. If they got married, they're both working, one of them had to quit. Usually the woman. I says, they got to be kidding me, Yeah. I never dreamed that. I always wondered when the teachers came, they got married, they're gone, That was one of the rules of the school system.
Times have changed.
Haven't
they? So was it at the theater that you heard that
Pearl
Harbor was
the doorman. As a matter of fact, I learned to be a projectionist up there. So when I had time, I used to go up. They had a fellow named Fred Lagerman. Nice guy, very nice guy. But he liked to booze a lot, So I used to go up the balcony, sit up there. And he come down one day, he says to me, "Come up here, Joe," And he had the reel that was running. He had a piece of paper stuck in there. When that paper drops, come down the stairs here and get me. Well, there's a room down there off the office. It was locked from that side and everything. Well, I didn't know it, so I go up and watch it there, and he go down. And he come up and everything. And then that's where he taught me how to click the darn thing. I think I was only 16. I wasn't quite that. I'm probably 16. Yes, I had to be 16 because I had to get my working papers to be the doorman at that time. And and I never knew it. Well, he went down, he was tipping, I didn't know that.
Drinking on the job.
Yeah, really. So that's why he wanted to get down and he drink, and I said that I get down. Then that's where he says, told me how to look at the theater. He says, look up the right-hand corner, see that black spot? He said, then you start the machine, he says. Boop. He said, then you'll see the second one. When you see the second one, and you pull this down,
That's changing the reels, wasn't it? Yeah. Changing the reels.
So I said, okay. So he stood there. I said, okay, yep. Okay. Next thing you know, then he taught me how to thread the thing up and how to get it done. And then when the war broke out, he left. And they said to me afterwards, you know the run? I says, yeah. I said, he used to run it for them. And they hired me for just the matinees he did on Sunday night, the matinees after that.
Yeah. You were a busy guy at that age.
Yeah. Matter of fact, when I can't remember who the last major projectionist was there that got drafted. I don't know what at that time, what happened, And they said, right away they said to me, I understand you could do it, So he says, Mr. Small, he says, he has Cooperstown. He had his office as a Cooperstown theater down there. Mm-hmm. I guess the guy's got, the theater there was his main office in Cooperstown. And he says, give the kid the thing and tell him start him off at $15 a week. And he says, if he does all right, we'll give him 20. I remember I got 20. My father's only making 10. I got 20.
Felt like you were rich, right?
Oh, God. When it was cash then. It is like today, check.
Yeah.
This thing, I used to bring it to Mom. I'd give it to she. So I told Mom, and she give me a couple bucks to spend and everything else to use. And then when I come home from the service here, she was putting money away for me. I had $650 in my savings account. I said to her, where'd that come from? Well, you remember what you worked, the money? She says, I put that away. She said, I opened a bank account in the bank for you. She said, I didn't take all of it. She did.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I couldn't believe it. She could have spent it. I wouldn't have cared,
Did you know where Pearl Harbor was?
Yeah. I had the idea where it was when from school,
Okay.
And everything, how it is. But I never dreamed I'd be there.
Yeah.
It's,
we'll get to that. But what I was wondering is, as an American, proud American, how did that make you feel when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor? What were you thinking?
I couldn't understand. I kept thinking, because you heard so many stories that Roosevelt caused it, because I guess he put an embargo on iron, or all those things that come in the papers and everything. So I didn't know what to really think. Why? I said, why would they want to do it? Couldn't figure it out. But since then, I've read a lot of books about it. Mm-hmm. And I think Roosevelt, I've read a lot of things about him since. As a matter of fact, my daughter-in-law threw a lot of them away. I had one about Roosevelt. Oh, I can't think of the name. When he got elected, I never knew that. I remember reading it in school that the first thing he tried to do was do away with the Supreme Court. I remember reading it in the paper school that they're old men, old women, get them the heck out of there. We don't need it. You got to change the Constitution, get rid of the justice, And I'm looking. I said, "Oh my gosh!" I said, "What the heck?" And my dad, they always thought good about him, what he had and helped and everything.
He's one of my favorite presidents.
Yeah. But he had a lot of faults, so like I said, nobody's perfect.
So when you heard about this, did that make you want to join up?
Yes, and my dad at that time, before, I don't know exactly what the heck the scoop was. If 21 was the age you could join. I guess you were under 21, you had to have your parents. And I remember so many guys quit school. You know, God, I could name you all of them, you know, because they're all going to be heroes, believe me. I wanted to go with them. My father says, no. Someone in this family's got to go to finish high school, he says. He says, one of the Mastrocco boys has got to graduate. He said, and I did, you know. I wasn't, like the kids said to me, I said, no, I'm about an average student. And one day my son was at, I said, average. I said, the Navy, when I got out of boot camp, the Navy sent me to Iowa State College. I said, I couldn't believe it. I said, we had to march 3 miles. I said, in October, it was colder there, you know. In Iowa, I don't think there's a mountain in Iowa. It seemed like the wind went right clean through you. It didn't matter where. And I said, I remember being freezing to death, carrying my duffel bag would be there, you know, and everything. I said, oh, God, I'm freezing. And all of a sudden, I said, there stands there, Iowa State College. I said, they got to be kidding me. You know, one of the guys.
You're in college.
Yeah. One of the guys looked at me. He said, what'd you say? I said, you got to be kidding me. He says, why? I'm the dumbest one in my class. I said, I mean, I was the dumbest one. I said, I was the bottom 50%. I said to him, you know, I said, how the heck did I get this far? As a matter of fact, everybody at home, when he said, Joe's in college.
So let's just back up a bit. So your father wouldn't let you join
Yeah.
at 17.
Yeah.
So when you turned 18 after you graduated high school, you were able to go.
Yeah, I know they could draft me then, I guess, but I couldn't enlist because I had a Louis Reddy first graduated with us. He went down to enlist, but his father went down with him, Louis Reddy. And I believe his father went down, and but he didn't show up for our class. You know, the day we graduated, we felt bad because he had gone down for a physical or something. He did that the same day, so he didn't get back to us at the time.
So you were drafted into the Navy.
Yeah, really drafted. Yeah.
Okay, and that was what? Was that 42 or 43?
43.
1943. You got drafted into the Navy, and where did they send you for your training?
Sampson Naval Base. Right now, it's the Sample.
Seneca Lake? Was it Seneca Lake?
Yeah, Seneca Lake. It's a national park now.
Okay, yeah. All right,
Matter
so
of
Finger
fact,
Lakes.
yeah, they got built the brig building there. That's the Unit E. There was a Unit E there, because I went up there when they opened it up. My son took me there, and when I walked in, I knew where I was. That was Unit E, and I asked the thing, could I walk down by the lake? He says, why? I said, this is the area where Unit E was. I walked, Mark came with me. He said, I said, believe it or not, we had a row boat, a bunch of us, you know. And I wasn't a heavy guy then. I mean, I was skin and bone. I think I only weighed 138 pounds when I got in there. And I said, do you ever try to pull those things, go, stroke. I said, we had to go way down to, I don't know where the buoy was, you know, and you had to go around the buoy, come all the way back to the base there. You had to come way back there. Just once, thank God.
Good. Tell me a little bit more about your training there. What were you trained to do at Sampson?
The only thing, believe it or not, it's all we did is march, carry a wooden gun. You know, and they try to see at first command, they will always try to get you to do, you know, attention. And then they would say, just arms. And if you missed it, you know, the quick call. Well, they say, attention. Then you had to wait for another word to make sure everybody be there, you know. And if you went attention right soon or something, I don't know exactly how it is, or show your arms, you know, put the gun forward. But you had to say, show arms, then you had to say something else. Twice I missed it, you know, show arms, I put it out there. You had to walk all the way around the square there. I think it was a mile I think it's a mile or a mile and a half square all the way around the barracks were square road one. And then you had to walk with a rifle in your hand like this. That rifle got heavy by the time you come around. The back again, they did. And
so this was pretty fundamental training.
Yeah, that's all it was.
For how long were you there?
6 weeks. That's all we were there.
That's
6
all,
weeks.
6 weeks.
Yeah, 6 weeks. That's all.
Okay. Where did you go from there?
From there, I went back there, and they shipped me to. Oh God. By Genesee, there. It was I think it was Hunt's had a tomato factory there. I can't think of the name.
It's still in New York State, or is it?
Yeah, New York State, up right above near Genesee. Genesee, what was it? The village there, Geneva.
Geneseo,
Geneva.
Geneva.
Yeah,
Okay.
just a few miles from Geneva, okay. And they were at that time they couldn't have the laborers. They sent a bunch of those guys to work there, and they gave us a cart to eat. If you emptied that car, after that you had to pay your own. The Navy gave you only could spend so much. They had for each meal a day, 2 meals a day. You went there for breakfast at noon, then you ate whatever place you lived on. I stayed at the De Palmas, Frank and Tressa De Palma. I stayed there for I think it was 2 weeks. We stayed there, and they lived there.
So you were put up in a private home.
Yeah, private home. Yeah, they there. Yeah, and at night when we got done, we dressed in blue, go down. Tressa and I go down to the movies. She was about the same age as I was. I think she was. I was 19. Yeah, I was 19 then, and I think she was about 20. And we'd go down together. And her brother Frank was. They had a railroad went there, so they didn't have the what you call the arms that was shut the blade. So they used to have a guard there. So when the train would come, he'd raise the red lantern to show the stop wherever it was there. Frank did. Yeah.
So you must have received some special training at some point, advanced training. Where was that? Tell me a little bit about.
The only place we got was more about was trying to teach us how to fight the fires in case anything happened. They give just the basics. They would, you want to, because they always had the fire. We had the fire crew. The tugboats had a special fire crew there ready in case anything come with their thing, to do the fighting and everything. But it wasn't really where you went in there. Matter of fact, when I was there, I don't know how it happened, but all of a sudden when I mustered in, they said, "Joe, you got to get on the bus." He says, "You're going to the fire station, the fire training camp," And then I just went. I didn't know until I got there, and they had the bleachers there. I mean, the place was packed with a lot of sailors, and stuff there. And all of a sudden, the guy comes out, gets talking about fires, oil fires, and different fires they had there. And he said, "This is what you're going to be trained for." And all of a sudden, this platform broke out in oil fire. All of a sudden, here comes a guy dressed maybe in asbestos suit with a mask over his face and everything. Comes out there. He comes out there with a big fan and starts putting the fire out with that foam. And I don't remember who the guy. I was the only guy from the crew there. I don't know why they picked me. All of a sudden, I looked. I said, "They think I'm going to do that?" I said, "I'm not that big a hero. Walk out in the middle of fire." But this guy just walked. As he's going, he's got fire all around him. But he just as cool as a cucumber walking in there. And then when I got back, one of the guys asked me about it. I said, "What happened?" I told him. I says, "I don't know if I could do that, Well, I can't remember, fellow. Don't you want to be a fireman? I says, "Heck, no." I said, "I don't want to be a fireman." I said, "Why the heck would I want to be a fireman for, I said, "Well, he's from New York City, the guy." He says, "That's my dream, to be a fireman, be in New York City." All of a sudden I says, "Well, good luck to you, And so I went up to the bunk. I did, sat down. I don't know. Maybe I had to read. I'll tell you. Maybe I was looking at a girly magazine. Read. I don't know what I was doing. And I said, all of a sudden he comes up. "You don't have to go tomorrow." I said, why? He says, I volunteered. I said, you volunteered? He says, yeah. He said, Joe, I told you. He says, when I get out of the Navy, he says, I want to be a New York City fireman. I don't know if he ever come out because we got separated eventually.
So what did you end up doing in the Navy?
At first I was just, I was a fireman first class electrician's mate. But when I got there, they had believe it or not, these poor guys come in there, like Ted Mason, Arthur, he was from La Jolla, from La Jolla. And Arthur Marcus, and he was from El Cerrito. The three of us were all electricians, mate. We got there, and I'm sitting on the pile, and they're sitting, we're talking. We just met first time in there. All of a sudden, they come out, and George came out in there and says, "This is Mastrocco here. This is the first time I do anything." So he takes me out to the LCM. He says, we got to go. He said, "You see these supplies? We got to deliver these supplies, So I don't know anything about a boat, believe it or not, what to do. And I looked at it. He says, just as soon as they get done, he says, you go up and unhook the boat. He says, take the halter off, come back, and John will go. And that was daylight then. Well, I didn't know how LCMs don't go fast too much. By the time we come back, it was dark, and you can't have no lights on then at that time, and it was all dark. He says, you're going to have to ride. He says, you're going to have to ride the bow and look to see if anything, you hear anything, hear a motor, and you yell to me, hear a motor to port or starboard side, wherever you hear one, And I looked, I says, this guy's got to be kidding me. If I slip and fall in that water, that boat don't stop. I'm going to be hamburged back there.
What body of water are you on at this point?
At Pearl Harbor.
Oh, you're all right.
Not in Pearl.
Okay, let's talk about Pearl Harbor a little bit more, because I'm really curious about your journey from the States to Pearl Harbor. How did you get there?
I got after I got back to the boot camp there to Sampson, I caught a train there and got a train all the way to Shoemaker, California. They had a big naval camp there, and it was colder than heck. They only had 2 coal stoves on each end of the barracks. He did, and you could hear the guy in the middle of the night going up there shoveling coal and keep it going. And then I was there maybe a week, 2 weeks, don't know exactly from there. And all of a sudden, the guy comes up and starts there. Right away, he starts naming the guys off, and my name came up. And he says, "You get on out there. There's a truck waiting for you guys. Crawl in." And he took us to Treasure Island. And we got to Treasure Island. We stayed there maybe overnight. And then the next thing you know, we had to get our hammock and put our mattress, tie it all up tight, and put our hammock in the sea bag. We did, and they told us get ready to go. And then they put us on this boat, went across the base, and we got on a carrier. I think it was the Enterprise, because I think at that time the Battle of Midway had been fought. And I think it was the Enterprise, or maybe the Saratoga. I don't think it was pretty sure it was the Enterprise. It got sunk or damaged bad. And they had this one named because the Saratoga and the Enterprise were sister ships. They were, and I went on there. So when I got on there, I thought I was going to be there, but permanent on there. I loved it. I couldn't believe it. It's just like floating sitting on the city. No waves, no nothing. They just cut through the thing and everything. And but when we hit Pearl Harbor, next thing you know, my name is named, and I'm marching off to the gig there where they took us, dropped us off there at Shore Leave Dock. They dropped it in there with the truck, and they took us up to AIA Barracks. They did from there.
So when you arrived at Pearl Harbor, could you see some of the devastation left from the
Oh yeah.
Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. When we got there, the Oklahoma was still sunk, and they were just pumping the water out. And because right away, when you come in from the mouth, where the side where the Arizona sunk, the first thing, that's where they came around. And all of a sudden, as they came right near the island, the tugs started to tie up on everyone on each side of the ship, and then they guided it as they went around. And I think it moored at where the Utah was still there. And I'm pretty sure theirs was, because I remember looking, I could see, I didn't see it good, but I see like something was there where moored there. I knew it was something. Then I realized afterwards, I said, that had to be the Utah. That one when I'm pretty sure it's laid there. And then we got on our boat from there, and we went around. As you in the mouth there, Fort Island was a seaplane play where they flew the seaplanes off. They did. They had a ramp where they pushed the seaplane would start, go on a reel, then take off, and then they fly down they would take off on the side where the Utah would be their landing field where you water. They take off of that. They would, and they would do that. But then they take us off. They took us to the island there. Then we got on the boat and they took us to IU Barracks. We did, and I got there. I was there. I was at IU Barracks for maybe 2 weeks, and then I went down the Pearl there. They took me down the Pearl there to get the Naval Supply Depot we was then. And believe it or not, at that time they must have just started, because I don't think it was maybe about 15 guys in that at that time there. And then we got bigger. And I think when I got there, I don't think, maybe it might have been 20 guys, maybe a couple of dozen guys there. Mm-hmm. And because up in the up where the guys that were already there, they had their bunks up there, right there at above the office. They had the bunks there. And it would be, I think it's 10 guys would be up there. They were the regulars from before, but about 15 of them was only left there at that time. Because they had to create something to get the supplies to the boat, the ammunition to the big ships, and stuff like that. They had to.
I think this is a good time to take a pause. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back with Joe Mastrocco in just a few minutes.
Okay.
Visit My Little Falls and stay connected with the latest news, information, and events in the city and the area. Our mission is to generate interest in the community and connect residents in a more meaningful way by facilitating deeper conversations about how these stories will shape the future of the Mohawk Valley. Join thousands of weekly visitors who stay up to date with feature stories, interviews, videos, our event calendar, and print publication, the Mohawk Valley Express. It's about timely local news for the community, keeping citizens informed about important issues, telling about the people who live and work here, and giving locally owned businesses the opportunity to reach a very targeted audience of locals and tourists alike. It's a whole new form of media-rich content developed specifically for today's mobile lifestyle and listeners. You can download our iOS app in the iTunes store, listen to our country music streaming radio station, or sign up for a weekly newsletter. Stop by today at mylittlefalls.com. You'll be glad you did.
And we are back with Joe Mastrocco, World War II vet. So, Joe, tell me a little bit about the living conditions where you were. Did you live in a barracks? Tell me a little bit about that.
When I was in the barracks, it was up in the IAEA barracks we were, and where Pearl City is, they call Pearl City. I don't know if it probably isn't the same now or anything, but at that time where a lot of the Japanese lived down in that area. And they had restaurants there, they had everything there. And IAEA barracks is right up in there. And I loved the place. I didn't want to go down to the harbor to stay, but I didn't have any choice, I don't know why. They had empty bunks, I guess. They wanted to fill them. I was one of them to fill them. But I used to, when I got off duty there, I always used to walk up the mountains. There, up above IAEA Barracks, it was IAEA Heights, they called it. Believe me, but there was a big building. They tell me that that was the naval base for all the generals and the admirals and everything, And when we had time, we'd walk. A couple of us guys, we'd walk way up there, and you could see the whole harbor. You could see. Matter of fact, the boats looked like thing, and if you went higher enough, you could see Honolulu, and you could see out the gate where as you come into the gate, they had a gate there. So when they would part that gate, like water gate underneath for the ships to come in, then they close it quick. And you could see Honolulu. And we used to go up there, look at it. I loved it. Just when instead of going, they say, "You going shore leave?" Hell no. I said, "They got beauty up. Why go to Honolulu?" I did go a few times to the USO shores. You know, they had one of the breakers. It was right off of the beach there, the big beach there. You know, Honolulu there, Waikiki Beach in there. They ruined that. Oh God. They should shoot those guys. Well, anyway, and we'd go up and walk and just sit there. And then sometimes you could see a ship come in. You could see them coming in there. And you could see them floating up and down. And one of the things that got me when I first got there, maybe 4 or 5 weeks, but no, I got to the base there. Maybe it might have been less. I don't know exactly. Mike Carmichael, he's from Omaha, Nebraska, I think he was, you know. And might be, he was a first-class boatswain. Well, all of a sudden he said, "Come on, Joe, you got you," and he took a bunch of us. Well, somewhere or another reason, they would allow certain ships into the harbor, the civilian, you know, the merchant marine. So some merchant marine had docked in Honolulu, and they had these big LCMs that was supposed to be brought into the harbor. So they had to get coxes and everything. And I think I had to be maybe I was a week there, maybe 2 weeks, because I didn't know what the heck I was. Like I said, I was trained as an electrician. I didn't know anything about diesel engines. You know what had to be checked or everything. You know, I only checked the oil, the stuff, and everything. So I used to check the fuel. But when we got to Honolulu, they put us on these boats already down in there, and they got in. And Mike Carmichael got on it. He's going to be the coxswain at that time, you know. And then all of a sudden, he says to me, he says, "Here," he says, "I'll get up there. You know, going to the ocean, coming." So it was all ocean, you know. So I'm guiding it. All of a sudden, as he's going, the boat's going. It was stalling. And all of a sudden, Mike comes back to the pit. He says, "Did you check the fuel tank?" And I looked. I said, "Nobody told me to do that." He says, "Guess what? All of a sudden, all the LCMs, I think about 40 of them, you know, going, maybe more. Who the heck knows? They had dropped off, go past us. We're way behind. And we're going,
Running out of gas?
Yeah. And he looked, "You didn't check it out?" I said, "Mike, nobody told me." I said, "I don't know anything about diesel. And I've only been on here a few weeks. I said, I'm learning, you know." And he says, "Guess what? Mama's going to get a big letter tomorrow. Dear Mr. Mastrocco, your son's lost in the Pacific Ocean." I looked at him. I said, "Knock off the crap." I said to him, you know. He's laughing. All of a sudden, whoever the chief petty officer realized it, came back. Then he got two of them side by side with us, and they helped us going along, taking us in. They did. We made it.
So that's a good story. So tell me about what was a typical day like for you? What did you actually do all day long?
Well, most of the time, when we come in 6 o'clock in the morning, we'd muster in. Mm-hmm. And the first thing I would do would go down to the engine room, whichever boat they assigned me to. Most of the time, I got the same one. Thank God, you know, because I got to know with it and everything. And I would clean it all up, you know, and I would get it ready. And then I would check the fuel and all the stuff and get it ready. And the first coxswain was George Sturtevant, like I told you. And we would clean it up. Matter of fact, that day when I got there, I didn't know anything about, like I said, I didn't know anything about the LCM or what to do or anything. George Sturtevant comes over and says, "Joseph Mastrocco, Mastrocco, you know." I says, "Here." He says, "You're my engineer and my lineman, you know." And he took me. So they were loading it. When we got there, we delivered the stuff with daylight. When he come back, he said, "Oh, while we're unloading there, all of a sudden he says to me, 'Do you lock the the engine room's hatch. I'm looking at him. I says, was I supposed to lock the hatch too? He looked at me. No. He says, I said, no, I didn't do anything. He says, the only thing I did, look down there. He told me, clean it up, get ready. And I said, that's it. I said, I left the hatch open. I didn't know anything about it. No, he says, good. All of a sudden, I see him reach for something. He threw something in the engine room. I'm looking at him. I says, what the heck did he throw in? No, didn't pay attention. And when we got back to the base, all of a sudden, he comes in, he goes down, brings it up, he shoves a box of shoes in here. I says, oh, I don't need any shoes. Jams it in my chest. He says, take them and shut up, he says. So I get there and I muster in, and the next morning I muster in 6, and I get a pass to go into Honolulu. So I go up to the barracks, the IEO barracks, I'm going in there. And before I go, I said, now, which entrance am I going to go home to? I walk. Usually I walked in the morning, just something about walking in Pearl. I just could relax. I didn't want to ride the tram. We call it the tram. It was a tractor pulling a little wagon behind it. You just 5 miles an hour. You jumped on, jumped off, jumped on. And I said, I'll walk it. And then, before I went up, I had to get a slip pinned on there, put my name, my serial number on a piece of paper. Oh, you see this button. That's the one I got afterwards for. And so I walked up. I said, oh, my God. I said, no, what am I doing with these shoes? I said, Jairene asked me anything about these shoes. I said, how the hell am I going to explain them? I didn't buy them and pay. I haven't even got a slip for them, And then all of a sudden I went up to the Jairene. I looked and I showed him my thing, and I showed him the pass. I did. And never asked, walked up. When I got in the barracks, and I remember my barracks were right in the corner. And I had they didn't have windows and just screens. They did. The roofs were hanging over, and believe it or not, it's cold in Honolulu when the breeze comes off that ocean. Tell me, do you have a blanket? Well, all of a sudden I get up there, and I put the shoes on my bunk, and I'm sitting there, and there's a fellow, his last name was Marcy. No, I remember when I met him, I said, your name is Marcy? He says, guess what? We got a nut house in New York State named Marcy. He says, what? Believe it or not. I says, it's Marcy. He said, just outside of Utica, near Rome, somewhere up in there. I said, it's a nut house. He got laughing like heck. He says, you got a pass? He had a pass to go too, I said, I'm not going. I said, why? I said, Marcy, you don't know what happened. I told him how George got it. He said, they stole it. I said, if my mother ever knew I stole these shoes, guess what? I'd have bumps all over my head because she beat me with that bastone. I said, you can't believe it. I said, even a penny, if I stole a penny, she would kill me, And he says, what? I said, really? I said, look, you got a pair of brand new shoes. I don't. I said, the worst part about it, they're not even my size. He said, he looked at, hey, they're my size, he said. So he goes down and puts them on. He looks down, he says, man, these are gold braid shoes, he says, I said, well, these are officer shoes. He said, they're comfortable. He says, what? How much you want? I said, you like them? They're yours. You take them. I walked away. I said, you're yours. You're responsible. I said, no way. But believe it or not, you learn to do things you wish you didn't do. And I ended up being a thief, almost like them. Believe it or not, you couldn't believe what we did. We had a bad, believe it or not, the boat pool, the supply depot, we used to call it the boat pool supply. We had a bad name. Believe me, you couldn't believe it. Oh, you work with those thieves down there, they say to us. I said, anything we can get in our hands, it's ours, I told them.
Yeah. You mentioned LCM a few times now. Landing craft
mechanical.
Mechanical, okay.
They were mostly, if you ever see them, they usually have a tank in the middle. Their job would be maybe, I don't know how many men lots of time. The tank, amphibian, most of the time might be the tank they had the beach take on. Not an amphibious
ramp
tank.
Goes down.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So that was a big part of your life while you were there. You spent a lot of time on those.
Yeah.
Okay. So Hawaii, beautiful place, had to be a lot of entertainment. What'd you do for fun when you were there?
Most of the time,
you can tell any story you want, Joe.
No, most of the time, well, when we got there, I always heard about the houses. They were wide open. They were, the things. And one day, one of the guys wanted me to go with him. And the first place he has is for the red light district. I said, "Where are you going?" "Come on, I didn't want to go down there, I said, "No," I said, "I want to go."
Why not?
Believe it or not, I didn't think too much about it. I wanted to see the island, I wanted to see Honolulu. I wanted to see the beach, Matter of fact, I got a picture of that. The Royal Hawaiian Hotel, just that, and with the fence was still on the beach, there. And it was only about maybe a dozen people on there. And right there was the Waikiki Theater. Mm-hmm. That was that I always went. When I got there, I'd go to Waikiki. You want to see that theater? I understand they tore it down and put a... I said, they shot Jesse James for less than that. They tore that building down and put a monument building up there, I said, they got to be kidding me, because they show all the and there, and the things he did there. But I always used to go down to the breakers. I liked, because there was a USO. I'd always get a beer. And I remember one time I went down there with Blackie Roberts. He was from Texas, he was. He said, "Where you go?" I said, "I want to go down to there first." I said, "Then we go get something to eat." I know I used to go get something to eat. And he's from Texas. Very outspoken guy, too, he was. So we went there, had a beer. I remember one of the girls come up. "Are you Lonesome Sailor? What the hell do you think we're here for?" He says to him. I stood there and looked at him. And then we went to one of the restaurants. It was there. I can't remember the name. I was so surprised, I never had anything like that, And right in the middle of the room, they had the smorgasbord. You got there and everything. And we went in there, and he ordered a steak, and I wanted mine almost well done, but he wanted his rare. When it come out, both of our steaks were supposed to be medium rare, and they're still bleeding. And when the waitress brought it in, he looked up at her. He says, "You know something, lady? What? I see the cow wound worse than that, and get up and walk away." He says, she grabbed the thing and took her back. If it's true stories, they said that when those chefs got back, they said they used to throw it on the floor, spit it on it, and jump on it. And think, now, did that guy do the same thing to my steak when I got it back? I don't know. I hope not. That's all. But
sounds like you ate well while you were there.
Oh yeah, the restaurants are very good. They were one thing I'll say, a very good place. If you had a buck to spend, you never ate. You very seldom. Where the chow line where I used to go to, it wasn't that great a chow line. It wasn't really. No. I don't know why, but it wasn't. We used to go to the civilian restaurant up there. We used to call it. If we got a chance to get the Jeep or anything, "Joe, you got any money?" "Yeah, we're heading up there to get." And you go up, man. You get a hamburger for 25 cents. And you got other things with it. That was really something. You had a big dinner. You would there just about when you had the buck, and then you could top it off. There always be a ice cream stand there where you get a nice big banana split, whatever you want. But at the same time, you would. It's really good.
So, Joe, how long were you actually at Pearl Harbor?
I was there from February of 44 to February 46. I was there actually almost 2 years.
So you spent your entire service in World War II at Pearl Harbor.
Pearl, yeah.
Okay. So what happened in 46? Where did you go from there?
46 came home.
Come straight home?
Home, yeah.
Okay. So what was life like in St. Johnsville after the war? Was it any different than when you left? Is there any changes at all?
Oh yeah, there was a lot of changes. All the things. All of a sudden the World War II guys, they think all of a sudden most of them thought they knew everything. I mean, yes, we did learn a few things, and he said we got to kick. I remember one of the guys that ran for the mayor's job. And they got elected. He did. And then another guy, and they got elected, and they didn't get a chance afterwards, that first year. They only ran for 2 years, but then he did. It wasn't that great. And we elected, I think it was one of the best mayors we ever had was Duke Devendorf, really. The guy thought of the village. He had the village at heart at all times, he did. And that's the guy, I don't think he was mayor when I got there. I can't remember who was the mayor at that time. But then Duke ran, they got him, and things got going. Well, then Duke just gave up, I guess. I don't know what it was, gave up this place, and that's when a lot of we had a Mayor Kraft and Angela Jaquino. Both were on the village board or the mayor. Each one has 60 years apiece. They always say how great. I said, go down the Main Street. If they were so great, how come all the stores are closed? I said, come on, knock off the crap. They were, I always call them Tweedledee and Tweedledum, honest to God. Believe it or not. I could tell you stories about them. I remember they had a ginkgo tree down the park. At that time, we had a guy who was the village Department of Public Works. He didn't hate the trees, but he hated to rake up the leaves. I didn't know at that time. And they had a ginkgo tree down the park. Beautiful tree. I remember my youngest son used to go down and pick the leaves up, bring them up to my wife. My wife loved ginkgo. Matter of fact, she had one gold plated or silver plated. She did. Put a necklace for a necklace. She did. And they cut it down. So ginkgo tree is supposed to be a tree that any disease is supposed to kill it, But guess what? I planted a ginkgo tree. I only had it 4 years, it died. I think my neighbor poisoned it. I think he must have did something because that thing was growing beautiful. It was, It's still there. I won't cut the damn thing down. He can bellyache all he wants because he wanted to cut it. Leave it alone. He don't even live there half the time. He don't live there 90% of the time. He's only there about 10% of his lifetime. And I think because he's a school teacher, I don't know the law of something because I asked him one time, why do you keep a house here? You live in New Jersey, then from New Jersey you go where the hell out west someplace for the winter? And there, he says because he was a school teacher in New York City or something. He said for tax reasons, he says to me. That's my home address. I don't know. I don't understand the law or anything. I don't know. I said, good luck. I said, I don't know what I said to him. If you could do that to the government,
Yeah.
That's the way I feel about it, I said, he looked at me kind of funny, he did,
Were there any parades in St. Johnsville when all the guys got back from the war?
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember?
We had one in 47 with the best. I got a picture of it, too, at home I have,
Okay.
And that was the biggest parade. Guys, all of us there lived, oh, man, you couldn't believe I don't know how deep we were. At that time, all of us could wear the uniform.
Yeah. Still fit, right?
Yeah.
So you're a young guy. You get back to St. Johnsville. You had plenty of time to go out and have fun. Did you ever come to Little Falls?
Oh, yeah. Yourself, Ferrero used to have the music shop here.
Yeah, on Main Street. Sure.
Yeah. And he's the only place, believe it or not, we had every time we had the 5220 club at that time. We got $20 a week. Didn't have to work or do anything. And I was always looking for a job. I wanted to go to work so bad, to get it. And it could never get hard. I went all the way to Utica, filled it out and everything. Well, anyway, every time I come up, I always style a salad, see what you had, the big band, Benny Goodman, Glenn Miller, And I remember that one day, Benny Goodman come out with the 33, Sing, 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 the big one. Then he flipped over, he had the big band at that time. That was big. Believe it or not, it cost 50 cents.
So you bought all your records at Ferrero's?
Yeah, I bought all the records.
I bought a bunch of my records at Ferrero's. I think I paid 89 cents for a 45.
I had them put away, and that's when, I don't know, when the guy put the roof on, the porch roof, I don't know what the heck he did. One day I went to pick them up. They're all cracked. The roof is high, but yeah. I don't know why. Maybe they're all broke. They were. Oh, I wanted to shoot well, maybe it wasn't his fault either. My fault to put them underneath the attic where I could reach it and pull them out and all that. And everything. Yeah, I said to him, that's the day I found out. He come to me, he says, he said, you know, you're always up here. He says, you know, what the hell is your last name, you know? I said, Mastrocco. He stood there a minute and looked. He says, you know your mother's maiden name? I says, yeah, she was Nally. I said, and where's she from Italy? He says, yeah. She says, from Supino. He looked at me. He says, you know something? We might be related. He said, I said, well, yeah. He says, there's where my parents came from, that same area.
Mr. Ferraro said this?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I remember Harold Sugar?
Oh, absolutely.
Huh? Well, his mother was a triumphal. I think it was a triumph. Yeah, she was a triumphal. His mother was the first because she had a I don't know whatever happened. She had a nervous breakdown or whatever happened. And he was raised by Pio Vincini, which was his beast. They were cousins. They were, and we call him. We call him Harold Sugar then. We didn't call him Zucchero.
Zucchero was the original name.
Yeah, Zucchero was beans sugar. Zucchero was sugar beans, and he was there until he was about maybe 14. Then his father remarried, and he went to live with them. And Dick Benzini, him and Dick Benzini were first cousins. They were, I think Mrs. Benzini was a Zucchero. I don't know what it was, you know, somewhere they were first cousins. He used to play, we used to be down there. He played with us when he was a kid. And when he come up here. And he married, what's his name? What the heck was his wife's name? Matter of fact, her father, and her mother stood up for my mother and father's wedding. They were. And I got a picture of them because I remember she asked me one time, and I showed him. I said, here. I said, there's your mother and father, Mary, and your father, Steve Lidl. I don't know if you remember him, Steve Lidl.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember the Lidos.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Steve Lidl. They were paisans. They were somewhere, I don't know. They all were. I always said, you be careful what you say about Italian. They close that somewhere in there.
They're all related one way or another.
No, really. Because, no, I used to say to Mom, you know, how come they got to be married there? He's got money. She's got money. You keep the money together, la familia together. She go like that. You keep the money and the familia together, she said. You know, all that stuff, you know.
Yeah,
and
sure.
Guys I said, I remember one time I said to my brother, I hated weddings. I don't know why. My mother used to almost beat me to go, you know. One day I was stubborn. I said, you're going to drag me, you know. I might have been 13, 14. Well, my brother went and everything. Well, after the wedding, was out of town anyway, because I didn't want to catch the bus, you know. I hated to ride on the bus all the time, because he had to ride on somebody's lap or something to save a buck. Believe me. You know, well, if you ride on my lap, you don't have to pay for it. Whatever it did. I don't. Well, anyway, she did force me. And I don't know how long it was, maybe a month, maybe more. And one of the fellows I knew, I was in high school, with, in the grades, I think we're in the, I was up in the high school, probably in the 8th grade or somewhere in there, in that area. I wasn't quite in high school. And I said, my brother said to me, you know, you were there, huh? Yeah, I know you. I said, did you go? He said, my father made me go. Joe, he said, but he says, you know, I'm glad I went. He said, the first time I ever see a bridegroom cry. I said, yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. I said, Hank told me the same thing, right, you know. And he says, Joe, he said, that guy came up the aisle with his wife. He said, afterwards, he said, why do you, he said, when she went down, you knew she was pregnant, you know. He says, and he said, when she came back, she had the veil back. He says, you know, some women, when they get pregnant, look better. But he says, what? He said, you could see she was puffed. You know, you could see the face wasn't her normal face. And he says, when you looked at that, he says, I would cry too. He says, you know, I looked at him. I said, come on. He said, you know, and everything. And I said, that guy should have learned what the old Italians used to say to us kids, you know, when he'd be playing with the girls. She's good enough to sleep with. Remember, she's got to be good enough to marry. If she's not good enough to marry, don't sleep with her, Giuseppe.
Good advice, right?
Yeah. Don't sleep with her, Giuseppe. They always used to say that. Giuseppe, don't sleep with her if she's not good enough to marry.
Speaking of getting married, so you come back, I assume you finally got a job and got married, you had kids. Tell me a little bit about that.
Matter of fact, I met my wife on a blind date. A guy fixed me up a blind date. And we went out, we did, Well, the next day at work, I didn't go up street. And at that time on the corner of Bridge Street, right across from the apartment house there now, right above the Bridge Street restaurant is right on the corner there. That used to be Floyd Perry's ice cream parlor and restaurant there he had. He made his own ice cream, Floyd did, and everything. And when I got out of work about 2 o'clock, I'd always go up and get a sandwich up there, eat. I didn't want, Mom used to say, no, Mom. I says, I got money. I didn't want her to bother to cook me something, which she would, or heat it. Because she'd be watching television or something at that time and everything else, or listen to the radio. And I said, no. I said, I'll go up to Floyd. I said, I'll get a sandwich up there. I said, for 25 cents, I could afford that at that time. You get a hamburger for a quarter. You want an extra little bit. And, I had a blind date with her. Well, anyway, and I walked in. She was there. Well, I didn't sit with her, because I just met her the night before. I didn't think I made an impression on her either. I figure I did. Well, anyway, I went over and she looked at where I was going to sit. She goes, "Come over," And next thing you know, we're talking, and then we met a couple times. Then we went on a date. I had the car, and we used to go for a ride, go to a movie or something like that, and that's how we went.
So what year was that?
53.
1953.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was probably it'd probably been in January when we first met, though, right afterwards, because that was her first year in school, teaching school there. She was a school teacher. Pardon me. Well, anyway, I got the date with her, but I had one day, oh, God. I had a girl, after my wife passed away, after I ended up marrying my wife, I did, and afterwards. And I remember her name, Olga Chinsky, and she was married. And she came up, and this was after Rosie. My wife's been dead over 17 years, well, maybe about a couple of years after my wife passed away. And she came up, and she knocked on the door, and when she was young, slim, but now she's a little on the heavy side. And I didn't recognize her. The face looked familiar, but I said, she looked at me, she says, "You don't remember me, do you?" All of a sudden she started to smile. And I says, "Yes, I do now." She says, "Why?" "I remember your smile." She says, "What?" I said, "I remember your smile, Olga." Olga Chinsky lived across. It was the Zizers and the Chinskys lived next door to them. And she was a year older than I was. He was. And she invited him. And she got to tell me. And her mother, Kate, was my mother, very close. And I always know Mom used to go over and visit with them all the time. She did, they they were very close. Got them. Well, anyway, she says, "You don't know how you broke your mother's heart." And I'm looking at her, says, "What are you talking about?" He says, and she told me one of the stories that happened before that when I was younger, And I had forgotten the kid, but I didn't think, at the time, I didn't think it was that important to the family. My mother had this thing about the family name. You can't do this because the family, when you do something, you don't hurt yourself, but you hurt the whole family. You do, That's the way the Italians felt all that. And then she told me how when you started to date your wife and when you got married. I said, "Well, Mom thought they were very happy and everything." She said she come over to the house and she started to cry. He says he was supposed to name the girl that her father, the girl's father, my mother and parents, had arranged for me to marry. You know something? If I'd have known it, I probably would never asked to go now, because I thought the girl didn't like me because I dated her a couple of times and she was never that seemed that friendly, And I said, I know Mom and Pop like her, but I guess she don't really, I never pushed myself on anything. If they didn't show any affection, I said, hey, move on, life isn't going to be that bad. And I've heard of stories about guys hanging themselves. Why, I don't know. But that's their problem, So, and then I dated her a couple of times, and then we started to go just about every day. We go riding somewhere, go get ice cream, go wherever heck we go, stop at a restaurant, get something to eat. We used to come to Little Falls, like where the tennis courts are. It used to be a big ice cream parlor there and the restaurant there. I can't remember.
Yeah, in the corner.
Yeah, on there. We used to love to get their ice cream, and we could go sit in the car, have ice cream, big ice cream. They had beautiful, good ice cream, I'll tell you that. I don't know if it was homemade or not, but it was good. And
So this woman you're talking about now, this is after your wife died.
No,
right?
This is before.
This is while you were dating your wife.
My wife,
okay,
yeah, I dated my wife.
Okay.
Yeah. After my wife died, I didn't date after my wife died.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
Because a lot of them always say, Joe, you're still young, I said, wrong. I may be young, but I don't want to go up that road again.
Yeah.
He said, why? When my wife was 39, I came home, and I called home. I did on the phone, and she answered the phone. I said, I'd gone to the store. At that time, there were stores. I was in the stores, I think. So they had a public phone on Main Street at that time. So I got the phone, put the nickel in or whatever I had to do. I said, Rosalie, I got a problem. I said, I was at the store, but they don't have this or this. You want this. I said, is there anything else you can get to substitute or not? I said, either that or I'm going to have to go drive all the way to Little Falls, And she says, no, get this. That will be all right. Well, in the meantime, I go get it and I drive home. Just as I walk in the kitchen, she's on her knees, just on her hands and knees, and she's getting up. I said, what are you looking for? She says, what are you talking about? I says, why did you just get up at the floor? Well, I looked over, there's Mark. He's only about 4 years old then. He's sitting on the thing there. And I said, Mark, what was Mommy looking for? He says, I don't know, Papa. He says, the only thing she was talking on the phone. He says, I don't know who. She hung up and she collapsed.
She got sick.
Yeah, it was. And her, she had a leaky valve. What happened? That valve must have did something. She just dropped. She did. Never knew. Then I said, she didn't want to go to the doctor right away. And then I don't know. It was a couple of days. I called Whitrow up. I told him what happened.
You called who?
Dr. Whitrow.
Dr. Whitrow here in Little Falls.
Yeah. He was in St. John's.
Oh, he was in St. John's back then?
But he's the best doctor ever was. Him and Dr. We named the bridge after him. They were dependable doctors, believe me.
Dr. Burke.
Burke. The greatest. Burke. They're the greatest in the valley. I don't care what they say today. They never carry their shoes, I'll tell you. Well, anyway, so I called him a couple of days later. He said, what? Well, he knew there was something wrong with her because she was having these spells, but he couldn't figure it out what it was. And he says, you tell your wife to come up here right now. I drove her up, and he examined her. And a couple of days later, he called her. He said, we got an appointment to take you down to Albany, and there was a heart specialist at that time, 4 or 5 as a group, and they didn't work out of the hospital. Then they had the office there. They lost off of Lark, I think it was Lark Street, somewhere down the south of Lark Street. They had a big building there. Oh, it was a beautiful building. And I used to drive her down there, and he treated her for till she was about 51 years old. Then he finally said to her, Rosalie, we're going to have to do open heart surgery. He said, I'm going to tell you, you only got a 50-50 chance.
Wow.
At that time, She said, good, let's go for it. She says, I don't want to live like this, she says, And what she did, and she came out of it. Then she had to have another one in 90, when she was almost 81, I think it was about, 81. And one day she didn't feel good. And we took her up to the Little Falls Hospital up here. We brought her up. And I don't remember who the goddamn doctor was. And the first thing he said, you ought to take aspirin. Now she's taking Coumadin,
Blood thinner.
So blood comes thin. Now aspirin thins your blood out. Well, I remember I said, Rosalie, you better talk to your doctors first. Oh, no, this doctor's so nice. To me, I look at her. I would say, I don't care what doctors say. If they're nice, if he ain't your regular doctor, I don't care how nice they are. Well, anyway, she did. Next thing you know, she got a bleeding heart again afterwards. She did. And worse, and then they had the operation again. And then I don't think it was, then she had a mechanical heart put in instead of a pig's heart. And then she had to really be careful. And then, then her thyroid pill. They changed to take her thyroid pill. And I never knew until that. Even now, with me, I got thyroid problem. And I remember the doctor said you should take aspirin. I want to give him the finger right away. Believe it or not. I said, no. You take the blood, thyroid, you take Coumadin and all that blood thinner stuff, it makes it worse, it causes internal bleeding. And I remember, about 8-9 years ago, they got a new doctor. They brought me in. And the first thing I walked in, he hands me the pink slip, the sign, do not resuscitate and everything. I think I was 92 or 91. Now I'm still working in the cemetery, digging the foundations by hand, mowing the lawn. I'm looking at him. I was going to say to him, hey, Doc, I didn't come here to die. I came here to get treated. I'm looking at him, I want to say, come on. Matter of fact, I didn't say anything. So he wanted me to go back 6 months later. He hands me another one. Matter of fact, they're still there. The kids sign my tuppy. I said, I ain't signing that. I said, I give you two guys the power of attorney. You make the decision. Don't resuscitate. Now, you know what the heck it is. I always tell them, dude, make sure you got my power of attorney. I'm not going to put it in black and white. I said, I don't give a damn what it is.
So you trusted them?
I trust their... that they're going to do what I asked. That's all. Right, if you can't trust your children, who are you going to trust?
Yeah.
I wouldn't trust a doctor. I'll tell you. I hate to say it. I see Washington State wants to die. Vote for you can commit suicide now, wherever heck they want to legalize. Come on. And then they call Hitler an animal. Come on. Yeah. One guy got an argument. He says, "Boy, Hitler." I said, "Listen, at least Hitler was doing merciful." He says, "Why?" I said, that's all he did is push you in the gas chamber and put you to sleep. I said, what the heck they going to do with you? Are you going to suffer hollering for air? I said, you don't know what the heck they do.
No, you don't.
I said, what's the difference, gas chamber or a needle? I said, which is the worst? I said, I prefer the gas chamber because you just go to sleep, they tell me,
Yeah. So you've been around a long time. Looking back on your whole life, what do you think is the biggest change that you've seen?
The biggest one?
The biggest change.
Yeah. I think was the biggest change when the United States joined the United Nations. I think that was the worst thing.
The worst thing?
Yeah. Because the people don't realize it. When Truman went to war for North Korea, did we fly under the American flag?
No.
We fought under the United Nations.
United Nations flag, yeah.
We went to Nam, United Nations. Then we had Clinton, the pedophile. I call him the pedophile. I don't care what they say. I had a book on him, and the fellow that committed suicide, the FBI said he committed suicide down in New York City. I bought the book about him. And guess what? They got a picture of him and Clinton together. Well, anyway, I said, we went on a night. I said, Johnson was another Democrat fascists, I call them. And Roosevelt was a fascist. You know, everybody, what? I said, don't tell me about Il Duce. I grew up with Il Duce. I said, believe me, you know. I said, when I was a kid, Il Duce not only had a foot in Italy, he had a foot in the United States. And believe it or not, I didn't realize this until I moved in this house here. When I first moved in the house there, I've been there about 64 years now, maybe 65 it has. And I said, he had one foot there and one foot in Italy, from Italy in the United States. And guess what? He even had one foot in my mother and father's house. That'd be over 90 years ago, you know.
Well, explain that. What do you mean by that?
Yeah.
You had one foot in your father's house and one foot in Italy.
At that time, he was raising money to start a war with Ethiopia.
Yeah.
He needed gold. Well, we had a lot of Italians. I call them Dagos. They think they got money, they got power. Though they got an education, they got power. That's the way I used to judge them. And believe it or not, I could name them. But the only trouble is they got grandsons, and some of their sons are still alive. You know, I don't want to bring them up. Well, anyway, I remember one time, I might have been, well, I'm not 100, maybe 7, 8 years old. I come home. I walked in the house, and Mom was crying. And Pop was just sitting there, you know. And I said, what's the matter? He said, your mother was washing dishes, her wedding ring fell down the sink drain, you know. So I said to Pop, yeah, but you take that thing apart, because I remember Alex Provenzani and watching him take that thing apart, you know, the elbow underneath the sink. He got it out.
Trap.
No, he says, no, it's gone, you know. I didn't know, you know, you don't believe they lie. Well, anyway, gee, look, I'd given it out. When I walked out down, Mrs. Maud Ryder, who'd be Julie's grandmother, would be Julie Ernle's grandmother, would be. She was on the porch, and so I was just leaving the house, and Maud says to me, "Your mother's still crying?" Yeah, I says, "Yeah." I says, "She said she's crying because she lost the wedding ring down the drain, you know." And they said they couldn't get it out. So, oh, he says, "You know the funny thing, Joe?" He says, 3 men came down here, 2 of them dressed in black with a brown shirt, you know. And she named the guy that brought her, the Italian. And these 2 other guys, I don't know, they could have been from Utica. They could have been, or maybe from the Amsterdam area, where the Italian, I always call them my mom was always afraid to go, believe it or not, I used to call it the Mano Laneda, the Black Hand or the Mafia, they call it. The Mano Laneda. She used to say, be careful. Well, anyway, she didn't know it. Well, when I bought this house, I was only in there, the bathroom up there, you know. It was always plugged. I unplug it, you know, and everything. And they get plugged upstairs. So I was in the maintenance department, and I went over to Ramey Luff. I says, Ramey, I got a problem. What the hell have I got to do? I said, I'm a mechanic. I said, I just work on machines. I said, but the plumbing thing. And he says, when you come out, he says, I got the trunk. I got something for you. Well, he hands me a wrench. He's got beast on. I said,
You knew where that came from.
He says, yo. He said, take this. He says, take the elbow off. But before you do, make sure you got your water completely off. So in case somebody opens the water, take that off, shake it down. Well, all of a sudden I took it off, and I shook it down, finally run it through. All of a sudden I heard a little clink. In there was a washer, rusted, you know, could hardly go. And all of a sudden I sat on my haunches and I says, Ma, you and Pa lied to me. Maud was right. You didn't lose that ring. Because there was a rumor about these guys, these certain Italians, wherever they came from, you know, was asking for wedding rings from their wives to send to Il Duce, Mussolini, so he could get the gold to start fight a war, you know. I called him the little fat Italian Dago.
So she gave her ring away.
Yeah, she gave her ring away. And then when I found I was going to go down, I said, I got to know. I was going down. I was just going to hit the stairs, the tops of the stairs, go down. And all of a sudden, I just sat down quick. I don't know why. He said, Joe, don't. Why open up old wounds that happened over 50 years. Who the hell knows, 40, 50 years, you know. Why bring them all up? And then she may cry. I said, why break their hearts again, you know? But I eventually did get her another ring, you know, for her and everything. Yeah. And, that was, and I said, that son of a gun. Oh. And everybody, and the worst part about it, the guy says, do you know who the guy was? I says, yes. I says, guess what? He's got sons here, and this guy's even got grandsons. Maybe one of the family moved away. I don't know where they went, towards the Albany area. I said, they may have great grandsons he has over there. I said, now I always know why they had the education, because maybe my father had to play deuce for them to go. Really, they had the thing. And my mother was very afraid of what there. Matter of fact, we had a young couple move across the street right after the war came, maybe about 48. He bought the house. It was up for sale. Zizzers wanted to move away from the alley, and they bought it. And he came over to talk. He was working in the Utica area someplace at the gas station. And I understand that, I don't know, that mostly were more all Italian guys working at those Thruway, when the Thruway opened up and everything. Must have been Italian. They must have talked. Well, he came in he says, hey, Jenny, he said, Mom would tell me afterwards. I said, why'd you beat him up for? You know, Mom chased him out with a broom. He says, you tell me, you know. And then she tell me, so he come in here, he says, hey, Jenny, he said, you know, you got these Italians. He says, what the heck is this about the mafia? And my mother grabbed the broom. And I mean, he says, your mother's crazy. I says, hey, Al, you don't bring up that thing. You know. And then she told me the story. I didn't know that Sicily used to be half of Italy. And where she grew up, I think, was part of Sicily. So her family must have told stories about the mafioso, you know, at the time, the mano nera, they used to say, what they did, you know. And she grew up with these stories. And that's why she would never let me go away, you know, from the steps. She's always afraid. And then I found out, now I realized it. I don't know if you ever heard that, where a fella killed and murdered his wife. A girl wrote about her aunt being murdered there. She was a Nakabuchi woman. She got killed.
St. Johnsville?
Yeah, St. John. But she wasn't a Nakabuchi. Rotundo. She married a guy named Rotundo. And at that time, the police force had her heart yet. It was supposed to be evidence. It was still pickled in the jar. It was. And I remember seeing it there when I come home from the service. They come and got me for a jury. They had to drag me up. I remember I said to Bob Perry, he was a police officer, get in the car. You're going to be on the jury whether you like it or not. I got the paper. Joe Mastrocco, 6 Line Place, St. Johnsville, New York. Knock off the crap, you'll get in the car. I went up. They had some guy there for drunken drive. I don't know what the heck it was. I felt sorry for God. Today, both of those police officers, Ben and Bob, had been out the door for the way they treated today, you know. Man, I felt so sorry for the guy. They only fined him $5. I said, for $5, the guy got to be beat up because he was in the bar and he got drunk and disturbed the place up. He disturbed the peace. Come on. Well, anyway, but then he told me about the heart, you know. He said, well, you ought to know. He says, you're Italian. That's Italian heart, you know. So I went home. Mom told me part of the story. And I remember sitting at the locker room one day, he got talking, and Don Schwab was talking. He says, who's the woman, Joe, the family? No, I said, no, Don. I said, I can't tell you. First, I bet you would jump out of here, go down to her house, and ask her, is that right that your aunt got stabbed to death for one reason or another, you know? And I said, he said, what makes you think? I said, Don, if I want a story to go through St. Johnsville, I tell you, because you're faster than any electric light bill. Anything goes fast, the mail and anything you want, you know, anything you go. Even the telegraph, I said, you're faster than that, you know. Well, anyways, Wilford Kraft come in and he told the story. He told the rest of the story about that Mom didn't tell me, what she may have known, you know, didn't want me to know. And then I found out, well, the niece of the lady that got murdered wrote a book about her, she did, about the murder of her aunt and everything. Wow. And the lady bought it. She was going to let me read it, and she never He brought it down to me to read it. I never knew what the name of it was, because I would have loved to read it about the book and everything to see what happened. But Mom told, but Wilford told me, he says, told me about, Wilford says, I remember, he said, my mother saw him walking up the street. She says, yeah, covered with blood. She just saw it was another Italian just butchering a chicken or a pig down there on Sanders Street, He always come up. He said he walked calmly up the street, Mechanic Street. Then he went up Averill Hill. He went up to one of his paisans up there as a hill. And from there, he took him to Lassesville. And we dropped him off there. There's someone took him there, took him to Canada. And from Canada, he went to Italy. And then Italy didn't have any, didn't deport anybody back. He died there somewhere and everything.
Did your parents stay in touch with their relatives in Italy?
Yes, he did. My father stood with the sisters until the war broke out, and my father, I shouldn't probably tell this, but my cousin told me about it from Rome. Because he was a cousin to my father. He was, but we called him uncle at the time. And he told a story about what happened. When I said, Pa felt bad after the war. He said never heard from his sister, And I said, how could Pa's sister end up in France, And he told a story about it, And he said, what happened was your father's sister went down to the well. He says, in those days, he said, you had to stay in line, get water. He said she was in line, get the water. When she come home, he said she heard someone in the bedroom. He said when she walked in, he says, there was her husband with one of the Italian women on bed going at it. So she didn't say nothing, went back, got the gun, and shot them both. and the brothers, he said the brothers got the wagon right away and took her to France, That's it.
Smokes.
So I remember my cousin Teresa. Well, she was. She had a son my age. He was. He was born 13. 9 days older than me. He was, Joe, and she knew about it. She told me. He said, Joe, he said, do you think the Mastrocco men were mean here? He says the Mastrocco girls were meaner than the men. He said, believe me, they were meaner than the men. He said, believe it or not, their husbands were afraid of their wives. I said, what? I said, believe me, they were,
I asked that question about your parents because I always found it interesting that here during World War II, obviously, Italy was our enemy, and yet there were so many Italian Americans here whose parents immigrated, and they served in the war like my father did, and here they are, we're bombing Italy.
Yeah.
The U.S. Army Air Forces, once we got into the boot, they started moving up, building bases and bombing Italy, and had all their relatives here. I always found that to be very ironic.
My brother was invaded North Africa, Sicily, Italy.
Yeah.
Yeah. He said, he even got up to one. He said, there was the Italian boy, I guess he lost both his parents. He's about 12, 13 years old. And he went down, and Hank at that time could speak a little Italian. He went down and talked to him, And then he said, we got permission from the OD to bring him. Hank said, while he was there, they brought him in the boat. He said, we want to feed him. He says he's hungry. So they let him eat it and brought. And Hank wanted to bring him with him. He says, Henry, we're still in the war. He says, you can't bring him. And he said to Mom afterwards, he says, oh, Mom, he said, I wish I could have brought him home. He said, he said, you would have loved him. He says, But Hank always wondered whatever happened to him. He says, I didn't know the boy. He says, only for a couple of days. He said, we used to bring food to him, he said, down there. And he said he'd be down on the beach there waiting.
Yeah. Interesting. So, Joe, one last question. As I said before, you've been around a long time. You've had a good, long life. What are you most proud of? When you look back at your life, what are you most proud of?
I think one of the best would be to serve and to say that I served in the United States and fall under the flag of the United States, not under the United Nations flag. And I don't care. We should get the heck out of that. That's my opinion. And like one of the guys said to me, I says, listen, have no problems sometimes. I said, we went to war in World War I because the Limey and the French thought they could beat the Germans. Guess what? We had to come and bail them out. World War II, I says, believe it or not, I said, my brother, when they invaded southern France, my brother told me, he said, there was Winston Churchill in the boat going around, he says, going to the Victory. He says, you know what we were doing? We were giving him the finger, and he's doing this. I said, you're kidding. And the strange thing about it, we had this bear monk. Oh, crap. I'll think of Bear Spencer. He was in the Army. Got to know him. He was from Fort Plain. He used to come to St. Johnsville. The guy, Bear, he was built like a bear. You'll see the arms on him. And we got talking one day in the Central Hotel about it, and he's telling about it. And he said, I said, Gee, you were, also my brother says, you were invading Southern France? So was I. He says, I was on LST-19. What ship? He looked at me, he says, you were 14? He says, I was on LST-1913. And Hank turned around, yeah, but that got sunk. He says, yeah, I was on it when it got sunk. He says, he said, what? He said, and Hank says, yeah. He said, they were only about 20, 30 feet off, away from each other. He said, all of a sudden they got hit. He said, man, did they go up, and when they hit there. And he said, guess what, Joe? He said, well, I took all my clothes off. I lost my gun and everything to save my life, my boots. Guess what? The Army charged me for my gun. I shouldn't have dropped the gun. I should have hung on the gun. He said, I'm swimming for my life. I got to save a gun. They took I said, I don't know what they charged. I said, Bear, you're kidding me. He said, no. He said, when my paycheck come up, there was the price of the rifle. You left your rifle. Come on.
Only in America. Anyway, thank you very much for doing this, Joe. I really appreciate you taking the time. You're one proud American, and thank you for your service. Yeah,
you're welcome. I always tell them, the only thing I always felt bad when Westlock blew up, I said, it's an awful thing to sit on a piling and watch those gyrenes bring those burnt bodies. And I said, that was the only disappointing thing. And I says, well, you're 19, you're scared, you want to help, and you can't do anything. You just stand there and watch, and see them, what they're doing. I said, that's the only disappointing thing I ever had when Westlock blew up. I says, and
Westlock in Hawaii.
Yeah, Hawaii, yeah. That was all the landing craft thing. And then, like I said, the locals always told us what was happening. They told us, we got a different story about it. Even now, I got the whole papers about what happened there. But the locals, they're the people that worked on the docks and worked in the different places as the civilians. Because a lot of the local people, some from the States there, and they would tell us different stories what would help. Matter of fact, they knew ahead of time. When I remember he used to tell us, keep your lips zipped and stuff, obviously to sink a ship and all like. One day, one of the guys that came in there, he says, you guys going to be busy tomorrow. He says, what? The USS Alaska's coming in. And Alaska was in the state then, And one of the guys says, take a walk. There isn't such a ship. Next day, here comes this big cruiser, the battleship cruiser, they named it. They made two of them at that time, Alaska and Hawaii, because they weren't a thing. So they couldn't actually name it, whatever they wanted to name it before. And they came in, and we stand there and look. And one of the guys, they get laughing because as we sit there playing cards on the table, like right here, playing solitaire or pitch, whatever, you get laughing. Yep, you sailors zip your lip. He says all the civilians know ahead of time what's coming in.
Wow. All right, Joe. Thanks again.
You're welcome. I hope I lightened some of it,
No, great job. Yeah. I really enjoyed speaking to you. So that's another episode of Through My Eyes. Joe Mastrocco. Next up, Bruce Hartness, Vietnam vet. Thanks for watching.